Hey guys, welcome back to Keep It at 99. Before we get into today's episode, just a quick note that this episode is actually 3 parts long. So this is part 1 of it. Hope you guys enjoy it and see you guys next week. Action. Hey guys, welcome back to Keep It at 99, the most edifying podcast in the world. And we're here today with a very special guest, James. Thank you for joining the podcast.
Man, thank you for having me. I've been waiting for this for like the last 4 months. I'm like, when's he gonna? The kids ain't said enough.
No, it was going to come eventually. It's going to come eventually. So thank you for coming on the podcast, taking time out of your day.
Yeah, thank you for having me, bro.
To come here. So my first question for you is, well, you have a very interesting story, very interesting background. So my first question for you is it's kind of a broad question, but tell me more about you, more about your story, about your life. Just kind of go through it.
I mean, so the first thing that I will say is I have an artistic personality. Recently really been finding that out with all the positives and the negatives that come with that. So I do not do fake. So what I say, I understand. It's like, yeah, I don't care who hears it. Like, it needs to be heard, but it's going to be 100. Like, we're going to keep it, Isaiah, we're going to keep it 100. So that being said, man, the real story comes down to if it wasn't for God, I would be dead. I probably would have committed suicide some years back. It was like a deep one to jump into, but that's, past about 16, 17, that's been a thing because I struggle with depression. And so that's kind of the negative side of being artistic, because then on the positive side, there is that, there's that mix of analytical and artistic, and I've always been that way, like since I was a kid. And like, it's why my folks had me, and I got one younger brother. And they had us in all this stuff, and my mom especially, man, like she always would say, like, yeah, I dedicated you to God, and I know He's gonna use your life. And so whenever I had a downturn or a down spell or whatever, she was always praying. She's always, my dad too, but like especially, my mom. And so like it goes all the way up to recently, because same thing, recently, had a bad period, came out of it, did some music, feeling way better, got way more inspiration, drive for life in general. And then it ties into how I got here. But long story short, I was Protestant 28 years. And the last 2, I started in, became a catechumen, got baptized in May. And, it's been a ride. There's been ups, there's been downs, there's been everything in between. At one point, I messed around with the occult. At one point, I was looking at Islam, and ended up coming back to Christianity because I was raised in church, like a lot of how y'all are, just Protestant. But, my dad was a deacon at the current church he's at. He's not, but the last ones he was. And then my granddad, also a deacon. And then his dad was a pastor. So like I have like my family heritage is very Christian, like all the way from slavery, all the way to the plantation, all the way up to, a lot of us are like that middle class kind of lifestyle we got now. And, it continued on with me. Like I used to hang out with my granddad a lot growing up because we grew up in the country out near Huntsville, Texas. And had some land and stuff, and so Granny and Papa lived over here, and we lived over here, and that's how it was, the first 18 years. And they had me in church, they had me in choir. When I was 12 is when I picked up the guitar, and I wanted to play drums, but Mom wouldn't. She was like, "It's too loud." So here, take this. It's like a little $99 classical guitar. Here's some lessons. We go up there, and I'll come back to this. I'm sure another question will hit it, but like church has been involved at every step of my life in some way, shape, or form. But then the usual thing, I get 18, I leave, I go out of state because I got a scholarship for engineering to the University of Alabama. And I get out there, man, and I don't immediately go hog wild, freshman year, it was like, cool. Sophomore year, all Hades breaks loose, and that's when all the craziness kind of starts. And from there, it was like 2 or 3 years. It was like I did not go to church. I didn't really, like I went every now and again because somebody would be like, hey, you want to go? Hey, you want to go? Da, 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 da. Okay, fine. But I didn't really mess with Christianity like that. Like I was more a hedonist, kind of like my patron saint kind of is St. Augustine. Because there was that, like I just went left, like the drugs and sex and alcohol and all that, and among other things. And it was like, I thank God that He kept me from going too far with any of that stuff. But I dipped my toe in and lost some time for it, and finally, it was some Christians like that came, just different people God put in my life, kind of brought me back around. So then, after I got low enough, I started going back to church, and I didn't finish school. I got dropped out, but I transferred around and that kind of thing. And after a while, I was like working at a brickyard actually out here, because I came here in 2018 and I got a cousin stays out on the west side, Powder Springs, and he was like, he's a legit OG. Like he's one of them dudes that was selling crack in the 80s. Like he shall remain names, but he did that life. So anything I did was nothing compared to what he did, right? Like I've never been to jail. Like I was always the guy that was like the last one out of the party before the cops showed up. So it's like the stuff we did, it's not on Facebook or none of that. Like, but it happened, and I got out of it way better than I should have. And so after a while, though, it's like you get tired of that kind of stuff, and you're like, all right, I need to do something with my life, right? And so I was like, okay, refining a purpose, a path, that kind of thing. And I was messing around with the occult. That stuff is dark, and there's a lot of death, a lot of pain, a lot of stuff, people you can't trust. Like I used to, and I keep in mind, like I am not by any means like a gangster type dude. Like I'm a nerd, so it's like, why am I riding around carrying a pistol when I don't need to at all? Like, but I was hanging around a lot of shady people, so I would always be kind of, looking over my shoulder, because you don't know who to trust, you don't know, blah, blah, blah. I had one dude rob me, and now he's in jail. And it's like, that you meet some colorful people, but even then, that's about when, toward the end of it, like 2016, is when I started getting into music more, like heavier, because of church. And I got with the guys that we ended up forming a band and stuff. Like I just came back from visiting them, and that kept me out of the street messing around doing that kind of stuff. And in that, God was even in. Always, man, like throughout my life, I guess it's the story of a lot of Christians' lives over time. It's like you stray away from Him, and then you get low enough, and then you come back, and then He's constantly trying to pull you back. And for me, when I would get too far out, that's when like the depression and suicidal stuff would come in. So there would always be someone, like right before I would get to that point, there's always be someone or something or some voice or some way he would get at me and be like, nah, man, don't do that. And there's a point where, because it's not a forced thing, right? It's like there's a point where if you go left long enough, He's gonna basically come to you and be like, look, you can keep going with that, right? And you're gonna suffer for it, basically needlessly, or you can come back, which one do you really want to do? And you can reject Him, and that, unfortunately, like my brother, that's kind of the route he went, and he's still, he's kind of still out there. But both of us had our wild moment, right? And I chose to come back to God when it got to that point, and I don't regret it, because like a lot of like the creativity and that stuff, even with the music, it's like the best music that I've done has always been related to church. Some kind of way it just has, because He's the creator, and He gives us that ability to create, and he's blessed me to, almost have the need to use that, in the way that he gave me to use it, or the ways I should really say, right? And so I come back, and then I start, it's like, okay, well, it's time to, maybe you can move back in with your folks, get restarted. So when I was 25, I basically said, screw it, started a new career path, the one I'm on now. Start doing construction, electrician kind of stuff, just because it was like, I talked to my cousin, and he talked me out of the last of the kind of crazier thoughts in my head. And so I was like, well, if you had to do it over again, which one would you, electrical engineer or electrician? Because he is an electrical engineer. He was like, electrician, because you don't have to get into student loan debt. You learn a lot of the same stuff, but it's more hands-on. And, it's a bit easier path nowadays, the way things are. And so that's what started me down that particular path. And so I ended up back in Texas for about a year. And while I was out there, sometime between when I left Alabama, like that last year I was there, and then when I went to Texas, I just started reading my Bible a lot. I read it through like once or twice. And then just from there, man, I was like, okay, I'm choosing to come back to the faith, right? Like, this is no longer, my parents dragged me, because I could leave, but I want to be closer to God, because when I was super low, right, I'm crying out, and he's the one who responds and gives me, like, life again and meaning and purpose. And, like, it was, it's almost like he's that source, that fountain of where all of the good things in life come from. And even though it gets rough, it's like, it's worth it. He sustains. And so did that for about 2 years, went back to my parents' church, which, it's a pretty good church. But there was just some stuff of the way of Protestant worship at the time that I was like, I don't know about this, it's not. I had, in college, I ran in with some feminists, and so I'm kind of like, I don't want to say sensitive to, but kind of like, the order of men and women, and how our culture is now, where that's all confused. So it's like, okay, if you're going to have confusion with that, or if you're going to have a lot of the young ladies out at that church were kind of, the strong-willed type and all that. And I'm like, that turns me off to that practice in general. I'm not leaving the faith again, right? Like, the next time I'm leaving the faith is in a coffin, and even then I'm not leaving, right? Because it just keeps going. But, there was a lot there, and I started calling myself at that time liberal Orthodox, even though I didn't know what that actually meant. But I just knew, like, that word Orthodox is like, okay, true to, like, true to the faith, keeping it real, all that. And I had a buddy out there at the time who was going to seminary. And so he started, we would just be talking, and he would be telling me what he was learning. And so that's how I learned a little bit of Greek and a little bit of, like, the ancient manuscripts and the books, and, like, how the Bible came to be and all that kind of stuff. And to backtrack a little bit, right around when I was kind of at the bottom and just past it, there's a guy in Canada named Dr. Jordan Peterson. I don't know if you've heard. You know where this is about to go. So he was my therapist for about a year. Like, I would listen.
Wow.
Yeah, bro. Like, I would listen to his stuff on YouTube and his lectures and stuff on, like, meaning, right? It's like, okay, what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a man? Because I was confused, I have the example, again, in my heritage, and my dad is cool, man. Like, he's been in my life and everything. But because of what I saw in college with those college girls, it really threw me. And so I was looking for, like, purpose. Why do I keep going? And, Jordan Peterson's got that. and he's got a buddy named Jonathan Pagot, and you've heard of him too. And that was how I got introduced to Orthodoxy, because he did this video, and it's still up, about WandaVision and like the symbolism behind it. And he's, the symbolic world is his thing. And like, I love the way I was like, this is something different. It's Christian, but it's like stronger somehow. Like it covers more ground. Like it's clearer. It scratches that itch that I had that led me into studying the occult and demonology and stuff. It's like it's mystical, right? But it's good, and I love it. And I just keep listening. That's when my thought process started shifting away, I guess, toward more Orthodox style, even though I didn't know it at the time. And I still got a long way to go, but that's when that started. And so eventually, I can't even remember. At some point, I started to figure out, okay, he is an Orthodox Christian. I was like, oh, that's a thing. And I was like, okay, maybe they have some answers. And so I never will forget, like I started looking up stuff. And when I was in 8th grade, because I was homeschooled, and then went to a private school that my mom taught at. And so she was, bro. Yeah.
There was no escaping.
There was none. It was a constant thing. Like, it's like, oh, you can rebel, but you can't really. But I'm glad for it, though, man. I'm glad for it, because that was where I learned about what we did, like Egypt, North Africa, that part of history. That's when I heard the phrase, the Coptic Christians. And I thought they were Ethiopians. I didn't know that meant Egyptian. I just knew that they said that those were some of the oldest Christians, right? And so I kind of forgot about that for all those years. And right about when I started hearing about Orthodox, I was like, what type of Orthodox? What's the different ones? And so then, the first one everybody thinks about is Greek, so I looked into that. And I had been to Mass. That was the other thing. I had a college friend who was Catholic. And so at some point, like, I went to some Masses with him. It was cool, but you know how that Protestant Catholic rivalry is. So I was like, they're too big on the Pope and, the Immaculate Conception, all that stuff. I'm like, I can't do Catholicism, but I like how it's more traditional. And so, again, it's more pointing, all of these things are coming together, and it's pointing in this direction. And it culminates when the pandemic hit, right? Because that's the last, I guess, big chunk to this story is when it went down, like, I was working security, and then I was working like 3 jobs, doing like 70 hours a week at the time. And it was literally, it was like I would get off from one, like, get me a 40 and go into because I was living with my cousin at the time, go chill in there, sip on some, get some pizza, sleep 4 hours, go back, work the next one. And at some point in there, the George Floyd thing kicked off, and I remember watching them march a block away from where I was at. And in Houston, it was pretty chill. Like, they didn't do a whole lot of violence and that kind of thing. But at that point, right, I had stopped taking communion because our church was meeting entirely online. And things got very political.
Sorry, you're talking about the Protestant church, right?
Yeah, the one I was at. And it's one of those non-denominational churches, which basically just means Baptist. To the Protestants' credit, by the way, and even when I go back and visit, then I'll go to church with my folks, or I go to church with my friends, and they're all Protestant. So, and I'll bump into an Orthodox church when I can. But they are starting to. We're all going in the same direction. And I guess I would pause at this point and say that's why I will always probably be more liberal on like the Orthodox scale, just because I've seen people who you could not tell me that they were not Christian, right? And some are Protestant, some are Catholic, some are Orthodox. I truly do not think, like, when I read the Bible, Jesus does not ever say about types of churches. He just talks about that there's one body, the church, and that's the believers, and he's the head, and he lays it out. And yes, he does lay out that structure, right? And the Orthodox Church does have the closest, it holds the closest to that structure out of any of the branches. But I legitimately don't think that those other branches of Christians who call themselves Protestant or Catholic, I don't think you could say that they're not Christian. I really don't.
No, I'm with you on that.
Because that was a thing. And I guess I'll get back to the rest of the story in a second, but on this tangent, when I came at the beginning, and I was actually in, because Abuna Elisha was the first priest I ever spoke with, and I found his information online. And one of the big questions was, what about the other branches of the church? I used to call them sects, like how Muslims are, but now I was like, okay, Christians don't really have like sects, like you have the Shiite. Was it the Shiites and the?
You have the Shia and the Sunni,
and they're fighting and killing each other, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, okay, we have different types of Christians, but historically there was a little bit, but it's like pretty much we don't fight and kill each other. You know? That's. So it's like, it's like, what's that verse? By this you'll know that you are my followers, that you have love for one another, or something like that. And it's like, okay, if love is the thing, it's like we probably shouldn't be killing each other, because, if I'm in the 1040 window and a Muslim puts a gun to my head and says, convert to Allah or die, and I say no, I don't think he's going to ask me what kind of Christian I am.
Yeah, you're right.
So it's like, I get that there's, heterodoxy, even, you could get close to heresy with some stuff. And of course, there's all those cults that branch off. It's like, there's a line, but I legitimately think, like, if you know, real recognizes real. And Abuna, what he told me when I asked him was like, because there's a lot riding on that. I may have not kept going in my Orthodox journey, depending on that answer, because it's like, you're talking about my ancestors, man.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we didn't know about the Orthodox Church. It wasn't here where we were in the South back then. All we had was a warped version of Protestant Christianity at first. But, you look back and you read like slave narratives and stuff, and you see people who they knew who God was, and they didn't know everything. They didn't have the deepest theology, but they knew about God. And they have this, there's a whole, like, basically it developed a system of theology in Black American culture out of trying to straighten the crooked stuff that we were given by the Europeans, in an attempt to control us. But it's like it's almost like they spread the gospel in spite of themselves, because God is so real that you can't twist what he says forever. Like, the truth is gonna come through. And so you see people who it's like, oh yeah, if you look and if you go by what Jesus says about you can tell a tree by its fruit, you gotta say there were some Christians in the mix.
Yeah, and I just, we will get back to the story for sure, but I agree 100%, and I think, like, God gives power to the weak to shame the strong. Like that's I think that's the biggest point. Also, like, God is a gracious God. He's fully just and fully gracious. So I will never say that someone is not a Christian because of what path of Christianity they have for themselves. I think it really depends on the individual. It depends on, like, who you are, what your connection with God is. Like you said, I think Orthodoxy is just the most structured, the closest to the original, the most, the closest to the apostolic tradition. That doesn't necessarily make it more Christian or not, or less Christian. It's just the closest to what the apostles taught. So I think that's just like especially within the Orthodox Church, it's maybe a way we need to shift our perspective. Instead of thinking of that we're right and they're wrong, more of that we're just closer to the original. So. But anyways, I would love to hear the rest of the story.
I was about to say, stick a pin in about 5 of the things you just said, because they're, man, But to finish up before we get into all of that, so at the end it gets political, right? And I don't like to talk much about politics anymore. I had a phase and whatnot, but basically I lean kind of right politically, and as you know, the black community is pretty politically left-leaning. But by the time that happened, I had the view that, your faith is above everything else.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's at the top of your identity. That's at the top of who you are. Above your ethnicity, above your race, above your political view, above your creed, everything. And so I'm like, really, we shouldn't be tripping over this. But we were tripping over this. Because there's, some of them got on with the defund the police thing. And then, the women out there are a bit more like headstrong because there is a fatherless thing. So the respect for masculinity is not there as much just because of what they've experienced in their lives. A lot of men just abandoning them, not being there, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, I don't want to just throw shade, you know what I'm saying? I get, where that comes from, but yet and still at that time, I was thirsty and I'm like, this ain't it, And after, I think it was about around that defund the police thing, and I had already not taken communion for like a year, And then I was like, okay, I need something different. And I really started looking at the website, like for the Southern Diocese, asking them, what's women's role in the church? That was a fun one. That was actually the first major question, because at the time, especially like right in the middle of the pandemic, the entire Protestant church really started becoming overly liberal in the sense that like female pastors really started, that's a trend that took off, right, around then. And I don't even want to say this is my personal belief, but I've read, the New Testament where it talks about the way that flows, and it's like, I'm not dissing women's role in life at all. I think it's actually undervalued. I think actually our culture doesn't value motherhood nearly as much as it should, and that's the most important job than any of the rest, because it's like somebody's got to bring up the next generation, and if you look historically, you see it's all what the hand that rocks the cradle really does rule the world, because they just have that influence. But at the same time, it's like, okay, well, what is the proper relationship between the sexes? And the answer that website gave was not a definite one. And that's one of the first things was like, there's a lot of times where the Orthodox Church in general will just be like, well, historically, these saints did this. There's Saint so-and-so and Saint so-and-so. And then you look in the Bible and there's Lydia and there's this lady and this lady. This lady started a church. This lady, donated. She was rich or she was a princess. I think there's a Russian princess who built a whole bunch of Russian Orthodox churches and stuff. And it's like the priesthood is male. And it's not because of, men are better than women. It has more to do with God's order of things from Genesis, right? But they didn't say, it's like, well, women's role is this and men's role is this. They were just kind of like, it could be a lot of things. And the way they say it is almost, it's like, it's not so much as having a strictly defined role as more as everything is in relationship to God's order.
That's a very, very Orthodox answer.
The first one. And it was like, I love that, man. Because it's like, it's not so rigid, but it's also still has an order. There's boundaries. There are defined things, but it's like it can shift. And that allows, I do believe that's how Christianity has been able to bridge all these different cultures, right? And like, that's how we'll take over. But, so they gave that answer. And at that point was right before another Jonathan Pageau video dropped. And basically at the end of it, he was like, you can study this stuff for years and you can look into it, but at some point you gotta go to church. Like, you have to participate in this whole thing in God's play. And of course he puts it a lot fancier than I can, but he was basically like, yeah, man, you need to get in there. And then he just started talking about, like, yeah, check out your local Vespers. And there's a lady, Frederica Matthews Green, who has written some books about like orthodoxy from the perspective of a Westerner coming in. And she was like, yeah, it takes a minute to warm up to you though. And, it's things to know before you jump in, basically. And I didn't read it until I actually had attended a few liturgies, but she helped me kind of get acclimated at first when, I was just brand new, right? But all that culminates, and at this point in time, some other stuff had happened, and so I moved to Alabama because one of the buddies I had met in college has a landscaping business out there. So I worked with him for like a month, got a job putting up lightning rods on buildings, and did that for a while. And after a few months, they wanted me to go to Atlanta to train where all the leads were. And I've been talking, to Father E, is what I called him at first. And me and him had corresponded via email, and then he sent me his number, and we started talking. And he was like, "Well," because I was like, "I want to see it. I want to see a liturgy. I've never done anything like this before." And he's like, "I'm coming down, to be the priest at this church in so many months." And then I was like, "Well, I'm moving to Atlanta pretty soon." And it took a while, but, in September of 2021 is when I attended my first liturgy at St. Mary's. And I didn't live in Atlanta, so I was driving for like 3 hours to get there. But it was worth it. And it was like, basically, man, the rest is history. Because I was hooked, because I had never I'd heard of it. I had because certain types of Roman Catholicism kind of do, considering that they broke off, from us, essentially. I kind of knew, and then I had seen Mass, and it's a little bit like it, but I had never seen anything like where everybody is standing and chanting and praying in unison together. And I'm like, even though a lot of it was, and I had no knowledge of Coptic, I had no knowledge of Arabic at all. And I jumped in the deep end, because I'm that dude. It's like, if we're going to do this, then we're going to do this thing. And I just knew, it was like, that is amazing. And at that point, I was so thirsty because when I was in Alabama, I was involved in the worship team with a lot of, there was 2 or 3 of the kind of country black churches out there. There's a lot of them. And like when we were that's another, there's just different pieces, but like when we were in a quartet, it was me and some of the guys that I also was in the band with, and we would go all out through West Alabama at these little churches, just playing music, right? And going back to what we were talking about, what you mentioned about that structure, right? A lot of those churches, it's more freeform, and it's very emotional. Right? Like it's very emotional, very feeling-based. The music is used to create that atmosphere, and the theology is all over the place. And there's always at least that one family that's like, you could tell, like, yeah, no, they're Christian. It's just there isn't the structure. And so when a lot of that stuff during the pandemic hit, and a lot of them, they closed down too for a while. Some of them didn't reopen. And I remember one particular time going back to Tuscaloosa, and at one of the churches that I had played a service at, and noticing, I was like, oh, who's this? Reverend so-and-so, and it was a lady's name, right? Oh, okay. And I saw that at 3 or 4 more of them. And even at where I was at, it was a dude preaching, but there was a lot of, like, I don't want to say disorder, but kind of, it's like if you have that many, in your congregation, right, it's like almost all of the young ladies are single mothers, like. And then at the other church, that was my home church out there, same thing. And I watched, like, imagine if, and actually, I don't know roughly how many, but, like, at St. Mary's, do you know around how many of the girls that are kind of in that high school group are there? Like, from, like, 15 to 18?
20-ish.
Imagine if between when they come into high school and before they graduate, about 9 to even 14 of them turn up pregnant and there's no father. Like, if that was to happen, which God forbid, I don't think it will. But like, what would the response be out here if that happened?
I will not comment on that. Probably not very positive, but
I'd like to think that.
that would be a very interesting conversation.
Multiple, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, just imagine that situation, and it kind of just gets swept under the rug. And so the dude that I was working with, both of us left the church at the same time. And I cannot, to this day, blame him for why. Because 2 weeks before I left, and it was a combination of things, right? But we had this discussion, and he was like, yeah, man, you're going to get tired of these churches because there's not the structure there. And I'm looking at how these people are living, and I just can't buy into it. And that is a trend, actually, in, I don't want to say the dominant American culture, but it is a thing. Because there's a relationship between Black American culture and American culture at large that basically the saying is when America gets a cold, Black America gets pneumonia. Like, a lot of it is just a more intensified version. And so one of the aspects of that is in those settings, right, within the context of like the Black church, there is a huge amount of disengagement among particularly the males. And a lot of it is because we look around and we see what gets called out and what doesn't, and we watch how people live. And it's like, I don't care, and this has been another part of me that came out of that. I don't care so much what you claim, I care what you actually are. It's like, okay, if you claim I'm, this pastor at this church and, I'm preaching God's word and all that, and then I find out you've got like 5 kids by 3 different other women, then I'm not gonna really take you serious. And even when we were playing out there, a lot of it I just looked at it more of as a performance and not so much as a religious thing, because it's like, especially after you get to know, the stuff when you get in the inner circle, it's like, man, these guys over here, okay, maybe they're more serious, but these guys over here, man, they're playing. They act, they put on a show. Even the quartet I was with, I'm not gonna throw shade, but there was some stuff going on in there, and I'm just kind of like, It's actually gotten better now because I actually got to play with them this last weekend, so that was a blessing. But at the time, a lot of that was going, and I'm like, I need to see better role models. I want to see fathers. I don't care what color they are. I don't care what they look like. At this point, I really don't care. Just be real. Like, yeah. I don't want to be in one of these churches that has 1 million strong independent women, and I have to hear about how men aren't necessary and all that. And then I have to see all these like missing fathers and stuff. I really got tired of that. And it was like, I'm an artist. I love playing guitar, man. I love playing music. I need to play music, but it's not worth me not getting fed at all. Yeah. And they don't talk about a lot of the relevant stuff that's happening with us that needs to be talked about. So I've got to get it somewhere. And that pushed me and him out of the church, and it actually has pushed a lot of other guys out of the church, and actually some of the young ladies too. Because it's like, well, shoot, if it's like that, I'll just listen at home, or I'll just, because there's no point in participating in that if it's not real, and that has led to a lot of Protestant churches in general shutting down. Even like while you'll see, the Black Lives Matter flags, or you'll see, those political flags outside of a church, right? And you'll see all these, you could tell this building was a church, and now it's something else. And before the pandemic, it was kind of going that way. Now it has accelerated.
Yeah.
And I think that's God kind of culling the field, frankly, because there were a lot of people who claim one thing and really weren't. And in time, I think this is one of the things that proves the merit of orthodoxy. And to a certain extent, Catholicism, but not as much. You look at who is taking, who's weathering the storm the best, frankly. Like, what churches, what types of Christianity are still, holding strong throughout all the, there's no difference. Gender is a social construct, right? There's no difference between men and women. Homosexuality is actually a virtue. All this stuff, right? And I'm like, the Orthodox Church they're not falling for that. And where I was at in Protestant land, I watched as every mainline denomination fell first to feminism and then to homosexuality. Because as of right now, and you can actually look this up, I think the Baptists lasted in the Southern Baptist Convention until 2021, like right around when I started attending St. Mary's, because they had a more liberal leaning at that convention. There was 3 different leaders who were in, like, I don't want to say competition, but they were elect this one or this one or this one. And the one who won, or it may have been when they were in session, but they asked for the oversight of a PR firm, essentially. And that PR firm gave them guidance about being more friendly to the LGBTQ, the alphabet stuff. And they
Sorry.
Shout out to Dave Chappelle, bro. The alphabet people who are just taking over. And it's like, yep, that's a sign that they are already gone. There's a podcast called Canon Press. And it's these Reformed Protestant Christians. And I do listen to them because you can tell like who's real and who's not. And there are Protestants who are holding out. But now the landscape is basically all of the mainline Protestant churches are either falling, or you have a situation like where St. Mark's is renting out now, where that local congregation, I think they're Lutherans, they're all old. There's no new families. There's no like growth. They kind of just, they're dying out and no one's replacing them. And you saw that from like the 2000s to the 2020s, the old guard that was holding strong. After a while, they go into glory. And the new guard just didn't quite, they couldn't quite adapt. They had no answer. The atheists didn't either, but they had no answer for feminism, really. They tried, and I'll give them that, but they didn't. And then they had no answer for homosexuality when they should have. And I'm talking about the leadership here, because obviously there's always that remnant, right? And there still always will be that remnant. But the overall picture is guerrilla warfare. Because you have a few like non-denominational churches especially, then you have reformed versions of every denomination that are holding out. But when you go out and actually start looking at these churches and who goes to them, it's our parents' generation and back. So like you got a lot, and it works for them, to be fair. Like when I talk to people of that age, I don't ever really mention like orthodoxy so much as I glaze over it, but I'm talking about the commonality, the things we have in common. And because my viewpoint is, okay, you're saved, you're following God, you're already a Christian. So I don't feel a need to convert you out of something. And if that's working for you, then, and you're going to church, you're doing your thing, I'm not going to take away from what you've already got because it works for you. But the younger generation, the millennials and Gen Z, and now Gen Alpha, it's not working for us so much. That's when you see more disengagement, more I don't go to church at all. Those are the folks where we could, start getting them. And a lot of the time, it's already happening because of the internet. There are these random, and I know they say it's like, don't look on the internet for orthodoxy, but look, it's there. And, you've got like Kyle, you've got Orthodox Meme Squad, you've got, obviously now we're joining the pantheon of discussion, right? You've got Jasmine Theodora with the femininity content. You've got different guys like that. You've got Redeemed Zoomer, who kind of does an overall look at every branch of Christianity, and he shouts us out. He's got a video called "The History of the Entire Church," I guess. And it's
I've watched that one. Yeah.
So you already know.
Actually, pretty recently, actually. So, yeah.
Yes. And and that's the new stuff, right? That's the us stuff. That's coming in to replace, because, God is always going to be worshiped. So there's always going to be something there. That's the part that's growing. And within that is when orthodoxy tends to be much more represented. And you see much more growth, especially among young guys. And like how I was, you're disaffected. You're angry with the culture. You feel like the women hate you. And and again, and I will not name names, but there are certain people, even within the Orthodox Church I've talked to, who call themselves a feminist. But all I'll say on that is that word has a lot of baggage attached to it now. So what it says in the dictionary.
Well, I will say, like, feminism is, the way I like to think about it is there's 3 waves of it. And I think the first 2 waves are necessary and important, right? Like voting and property rights and all, like that's fine. The third wave of feminism is where I start to have an issue with it, which is what we would call modern day feminism. Which I think the root of it, honestly, is the sexual revolution of the 1960s and 70s. And where that started was when Catholicism decided to have their second Vatican II, the Council of Vatican II, and they decided to reform their church to make it more modern and more appealing to Protestants to convert, because in the 1960s, the most popular TV show was a Catholic TV show where some guy would explain Catholicism.
What was that bishop's name?
I'm not sure.
I know what you're talking about, though.
But yeah. And the Catholicism skyrocketed in the 1960s in America. It was the fastest growing religion. It was doing very well, and they decided, so let's make it more appealing. And that's where, they kind of messed up. I mean, I actually have a podcast where we talked about this kind of briefly. Sorry if the self-plug.
No, keep going.
But you can go watch it. It'll be up here.
What's the name of it?
It's one with Abuna Teji Iskander.
Abuna Teji Iskander. Where can people find it?
Or it's the one with Abuna Luke. It'll be on the top corner
of the thing.
Of the thing, yeah.
Y'all check that out.
Yeah. So it's that idea of let's modernize, let's reform, is always what it can backfire very easily. I think that's why orthodoxy is so strong, because we don't reform. Like we stay true to what we believe in, and it doesn't matter. Like it doesn't matter. It's timeless. Exactly. It's ancient. It's timeless. It's, as Abuna Nate loves to say, pre-denominational.
Yeah, I love it when
it's just it is what it is, and that's how it's going to be. And people want that. People want structure, consistency. That's what people are looking for in the world today, because when you go outside, all you see is inconsistency. All you see is politics. All you see is people changing left to right. Libertarian authoritarianism. You just see people, just so fluid, moving around everything, going with the flow, trying to be politically correct. It's so orthodoxy is that. I mean, the word orthodox means a straight path. It doesn't turn, doesn't bend. It is what it is. And I think that's what makes it so appealing, especially in the modern day. And I'll say, like, now that I'm in college and stuff, we have an Orthodox campus ministry called OCCM.
Awesome.
And what you'll realize is that, first off, the majority of people we have there are not Coptic Orthodox. Mm-hmm. The majority of people we have there are just, random people from the school, and like they're all looking for the same thing. Mm-hmm. I like to say, like, everyone has a God-sized hole in their heart. And they're trying to fill it with not God. The only thing that'll ever fill that hole is God. And in my personal and humble opinion, I think orthodoxy is the best way to kind of fill that hole.
Yes.
It's
the straightest, it's the best practice. Actually, if I can insert this point here, because that is beautifully dovetails with it, that's the way I describe it increasingly to because I get challenged a lot, man. Like, why you do this? Is that a cult? This and this and this. My own family has not ever been to an Orthodox service. I'm the only one out of all of us that I've ever heard of that is even not Protestant. So it's a big deal. So they're always asking questions and trying to see. And one of the things I will say is it's like, it's not so much, again, with the we're right and you're wrong. It's like, I'm not the judge. God is the judge. Mm-hmm. If your name's in there, he's the one who knows. So that's between you and him. But we both know about the Trinity. We both know about the cross. We both know about, actually one of the churches I was at, the Methodist church, we recited the Nicene Creed.
Wow, and that's different.
Yeah,
especially considering where the United Methodist Church is, the path that they're going on. That's very interesting. I saw something on YouTube the other day. You'll think this is funny. I saw something called the Sparkle Creed.
I heard about that. How would you describe that?
I'm not really sure how to feel. I mean, I would play a clip on screen, but I'm not going to do that.
The Daily Wire has they covered this too. A lot of the different Protestant,
I'll just say, if you don't know what it is and you don't want to look it up, it's a very diverted. Have you ever heard of the prayer of the spaghetti monster?
Why does that sound? Is that a South Park thing?
It might be in South Park, I'm not sure. But there was a Stanford student in 2008 that decided to make like a fake cult, fake religion just to get people to like follow it. And it's the Church of the Spaghetti Monster. And basically it takes like one of the prayer is like they take Our Father and substitute it with like pasta and like garlic bread. So if it's kind of like the Sparkle Creed is kind of like that, but it's the creed and it just has to do with
and he was fabulous.
Yeah, like the alphabet people or whatever James said earlier. But anyways, so that is very interesting that
it's a hot mess, man.
It is, yeah, it is. But it's very interesting they said the Nicene Creed at a Methodist church. That's something new.
I think honestly, it's because that Methodist church was a mission-based church, like how St. Mark's is, and it's like, okay, this church is more for this. That church is called City of Refuge, and I don't know if it's still around because after Reverend Rufus left, fun fact, he was my parents' marriage counselor. That was another thing. But after he left, the next guy came in, and it kind of started going down because that's a thing. Like Protestant Christianity is very individualistic.
Yeah.
There's no uniformity. There are people who call themselves bishops, but there are no actual bishops.
There's no real structure.
Yes. Once you get to the pastor, who is the equivalent of a priest, it doesn't go, because they have pastors, they have deacons, they have ushers. Then they have that board, for the...
Like every church is its own, is its own. It just
essentially
by itself.
Even within the same denomination, especially Baptists. If you tell me you're Baptist, I don't know what that means, because that could be anything. That could be anything, bro. Some of the biggest womanizers that I knew when I was out in the music scene, they would technically be considered Baptists. So I'm like, I don't know what that means. Like and they're the largest one too. So there's all this autonomy. There's no, like you said, there's no structure. There's no cohesiveness. That's why you have all those splits. And as an aside to that, that's why I think in 100 years, I don't know if Protestantism will really be a thing. It will probably always stick around on some level, but it'll be more of a niche thing.
I will say, you made a point very early on about how everyone's kind of going in the same direction. All these churches are going in the same direction. I think if you think about how politics and how it has worked historically, it's always a pendulum. So you get swung from one extreme all the way to the other extreme, back to the other extreme. So I think right now we're entering a period where we're on a very high extreme on one side, and it's coming down.
Yeah.
And so I agree with you on that point that in general, outside of religion, but liberalism, homosexuality, feminism, all that is crumbling upon itself. Because like you said earlier, you said something about the truth will set you free. That's in the Bible, and it's true. I mean, if you stick to the truth, and I think this is another reason why Orthodoxy always will stand firm, is that it doesn't matter. Right? It doesn't matter how persecuted we are. It doesn't matter really what happens to our church. Like,
Low key, the persecution to make it stronger.
yeah, 100%. I agree 100%. I think, the Coptic Church is also known as a Church of the Martyrs. You know, like the list never ends. Of even to this day, there's still people.
The 21.
The 21 in Libya, that was 2015. There's recently, maybe last year, there was a priest in Alexandria that got stabbed. It happens a lot. It happens a lot more than, at least than it should, for sure.
Yeah.
And so I think like that pendulum is swinging back to where we're getting to a point of uniformity among all the believers. I think even within a political scene, I think in 5-10 years, like it'll be a lot more centralized than we give it credit for. The extremists will fall because no one likes extreme values.
They can't hold up over time. They're killing. Okay, I'll take a slight detour to expound on that. There is a reason why white people are shrinking. And I find it hilariously interesting because sometimes I just be studying this stuff, right? Like, look at how Europe is turning back Muslim to where it was way back when, and they bought atheism, right? That fundamentally, from about the sexual revolution, really, that's where a lot of stuff, popped off, and they bought into atheism, and one of the consequences to that, if you're an atheist and you really believe there is no God, then why reproduce yourself into the future? Like, why spend that much time raising?
Well, it's not even that. It's why live? Why do anything? What's the purpose? And I think especially that I'm in college now.
Oh yeah, you see it now.
Yeah, like I've had conversations with people who are like, oh, I'm agnostic or oh, I'm atheist.
So many.
Who first off don't know what the difference is between the two, but that's another point. It comes to a point of like, okay, so what's your purpose of living? I don't need one. That's the most scary thing to me. Bro. That's the most dangerous. Yeah, I see that as the most dangerous thing because if you can't answer, not if you can't answer why I have a purpose, but if your answer to why or what is my purpose is it doesn't matter, what you're doing is you're devaluing what humanity is. You're putting humans and animals at the same level. You're just like, you're like everything happens by chance. You're just like a creation of something. And what that will do is that destroys any sense of what, true like confidence in yourself is or what, true love for others or, any of that stuff, all that goes away.
You can't build a civilization on that.
You can't build it yourself without that. So obviously you can't build a civilization.
Like,
so I think
it destroys everything.
Exactly. So I think if that's the direction that we go in, then something has to take a purpose. Like you can say, oh, it doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, whether you realize it or not, there's a purpose you're fulfilling. So something has to take that role in your mind at some point in your life. And I think that in the current times we're living in, like Christianity, but specifically Orthodoxy, really answers that question very well. It's just about getting that to people.
People are running towards it, man. So I can use me as an example of a larger point, right? If I had to get a tattoo of like the most relevant thing that I would say about who God is to me, it would read God, the God of all meaning. Because my life as being a hedonist, right? And don't get me wrong, man, that sinning and stuff, it's fun at first. It's fun at first. The first weed I smoked, man, I had the best high. And I'm gonna keep it real. I'm not advising anybody to do this, but I'm about to keep it real. The first woman I got with, it felt amazing. The first time I got drunk, actually that just sucked. But all of that, right? Yeah, it was awesome. All of that stuff that I did eventually hollowed me out as a person. I got to where I didn't know who I was as a man. I didn't know who I was as a human. I knew how to act, but I was borrowing off of Christian framework. Because you can't get away. That's what a lot of these atheists, that's what all of them fundamentally do. They, without realizing it, they borrow off of Christian morality because they
Yeah.
don't have anything else.
110%. I remember I had another podcast where I debated an atheist for like an hour and a half.
Oh man.
And that one, like, we're arguing about moral code and what it, like, how to measure morality. And the point was like, you can't just not you can't just not have morals. Like, that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Like,
Humans
whether
are not amoral.
exactly
Ever.
whether you have good morals or bad morals,
You have
there's still
some morals.
And you can't there has to be a way to measure them to each other. Like, there's no such thing as, like, absolute truth exists. There's an absolute right and an absolute wrong.
Logically speaking, that statement proves itself. Because
It
if you
has
say
to.
there is no absolute truth,
That is an absolute truth.
Is that absolutely true? But if you say there is absolute truth, it's like all I have to do is give you one example of that statement being an absolute truth proves itself. I love how God uses logic. But anyways.
Yeah, and so the point that kept coming up is, like, you borrow from some moral code or a mixture of them, but there is something there's something true about the morals that you, like, believe in.
And now we're getting neo-paganism coming back. Now
Yeah.
we're getting the evolution of feminism is witchcraft. There's a dude named Jay Dyer who has a YouTube channel, and him and his wife, they talk about that. I've actually seen that. I was doing security one night and talked with this girl for 45 minutes about that. She went to Catholic school. She was at the rebellious phase, freshman. And one of the things she said was, like, when talking about that, was like, there are higher powers. There's truth to a lot of that stuff. And there is a desire for the divine feminine, right? Because it's like, well, it comes out of the Abrahamic religions, right? Judaism, Christianity. If you're in the West, that's at the base of Western morality. So anything like, because, it's like we don't have Hinduism, we don't have Shintoism, we don't have all of that. That's more in the East. And even then, they have their own thing, right? But for us, when they start to, especially like that branch, it's like, okay, well, why isn't there a divine feminine? And they invert Mary. They invert Saint Mary. And you get into witchcraft, like the old school, like Old Testament, God told you to kill the witch type of witchcraft. And then atheism, it basically, they killed it, which is why they have the strongest influence, right? Because atheism only covers logic. It does not cover the fullness of the human soul.
I mean, I like to think of atheism as the most selfish belief system you can have. Because by believing in atheism, by definition, you're a god of your own life. And I know atheists hate that claim and hate that argument, but it's true.
Yeah, you can't deny it.
That means you have control over everything in your own life. So you are a god of your own life. And I think, like, going back to this point of feminism, and I'm not never gonna talk about feminism. We'll go for it.
No, that's me, bro. That's me. It's just, that's one of the, if you want to know the story of how I got here, feminism actually ties very heavily to it because I am very, again, I come from that Black American culture. And if you look, as far as which women bought it wholesale, Black American women did. Statistically speaking, and I have done, at one point I did some research on this, right? When they say, I don't need a man, they are technically correct. The government stepped in with the welfare state and supplanted the Black man's role as the provider of the Black family. But there's some things that you can't let make up for. And why do you think there's all this violence in the hood? That's why. Because young, angry Black men with no fathers. That's why when the liberals are always talking about, inequality and stuff, it's not about race. It's about, like, your circumstance you come up in. Yeah, and it just so happens to somewhat correlate because of all those systems. And so functionally, the most feminist women are Black women. And you probably know who this is, but Candace Parker does a very good job of talking about, feminine, like, not feminism, but like, violence among the Black community and why it happens and what inequality You're really talking Candace Parker or Candace Owens?
Sorry, Candace Owens. Because she... sorry, not Candace Parker. She's the basketball player. Yeah, sorry, that is my bad. Yeah, I don't know how I got that mixed up. But you know what I'm talking about. does a very good job of explaining that and kind of like debating that and talking about that.
Hey guys, thank you for watching part 1 of today's podcast. Check out part 2 next week.